You'll never see him again. Those words tumbled out of Ashley's mouth like venom as she slammed the door in my face. I stood there like a pillar of salt, clutching the colorful gift in my trembling hands. A green stuffed dinosaur. I'd spent weeks searching for because it was exactly what my grandson Ethan had asked for his 6th birthday. On the other side of the closed door, I could hear the children's laughter and his little voice singing happy birthday, my own blood celebrating without me. At that moment, something inside my chest snapped like a dry twig in winter. It wasn't just the pain of rejection, it was the piercing certainty that she had won. The war one hadn't even known we were fighting. But what Ashley didn't know was that I was keeping a secret that would turn her victorious smile into pure terror when I finally decided to reveal it to everyone. Maybe you're listening to this story because you've been through something similar, or maybe you're just looking for a moment of reflection and entertainment. Either way, you're in the right place. This channel was created for people like us who know that real life sometimes surpasses any fiction. Here I share true stories with all the complexity and emotion that only life can offer. Subscribe and become part of this family that understands, supports, and has fun together. Now join me as I tell you how it all began. My name is Mary, I'm 62 years old, and I've been an independent woman my entire life. I raised my son Michael alone after my husband died in an accident when he was just 8. I worked twice as hard, saved every penny, and ensured he had a good education and all the opportunities I never had. He was a sweet boy, always attentive and loving. We became an inseparable duo, facing every challenge life threw at us together. Winter nights in Nashville were especially difficult at first when the house felt too big without John, my late husband. Michael and I would cuddle on the couch with hot chocolate, watching old movies that made us laugh until our stomachs hurt. It was our way of chasing away the sadness of reminding each other that even with this terrible loss, we still had each other. On Sunday mornings, we would make pancakes together, making funny patterns with the batter in the pan, a tradition that began when he was 9, and that we continued until he left home for college. It was never easy balancing 2, sometimes 3 jobs with raising a child. I worked as a receptionist during the day, a waitress at night, and on weekends I sold crafts at local fairs. My hands were always calloused, my feet always sore, but when Michael brought home a report card with excellent grades, or when he surprised me with a drawing he'd made especially for me, all the tiredness melted away. I especially remember one Mother's Day when he was 12. He saved his allowance for months to buy me a small bird-shaped brooch. It wasn't valuable in monetary terms, but it meant the world to me. I still keep it in a special little box, a tangible reminder of the pure and sincere love we always shared. When he graduated from college with honors, believe me, I cried like a baby at the ceremony. He was my greatest pride, and all the sacrifices had been worth it. The sleepless nights helping him with school projects, the budget-friendly snacks to save every penny for his education, the winters with minimal heating to reduce bills. It had all culminated in that glorious moment watching him receive his degree in computer science, smiling beneath his graduation cap. I remember thinking John would be so proud that somehow he was there with us witnessing our son's success. After the ceremony, Michael hugged me so tightly, I almost lost my breath. "We did it, Mom," he whispered in my ear. "No, son," I replied through tears. "You did it. I was just there for you." Michael landed a great job at a tech company in Boston and began building his own life. The distance between Nashville and Boston seemed enormous at first, and I confess I cried for hours after helping him settle into his first apartment in the city. I returned to a house that was too quiet with an empty bedroom that held so many memories. But I adapted over time, as I always did when faced with challenges. Even with the distance, we spoke every day, and he came to visit me in Nashville regularly. Our relationship was solid, based on years of trust and mutual love. Michael's early years in Boston were filled with enthusiastic stories about his work, his new friends, his discoveries in the big city. He seemed to be blossoming just as I'd always dreamed he would. The company he worked for developed software for large corporations, and Michael quickly distinguished himself as a talented and dedicated programmer. Sometimes during our phone conversations, he would delve into technical explanations that I barely understood, but I loved hearing his animated voice, his genuine enthusiasm for this new world he had conquered. With each visit to Nashville, I noticed how much more mature, more confident, and more fulfilled he seemed. It was like watching a garden you've carefully planted finally blossom into its full glory. It was during one of these visits, Christmas 2017, that he told me about Ashley. We were sitting in the living room, a fire crackling in the fireplace John had built with his own hands decades earlier. Michael had just helped me decorate the Christmas tree using the same old ornaments as always, including some he'd made in elementary school. His expression suddenly changed, becoming more serious, more intense. "Mom," he said nervously, twirling the mug of hot chocolate between his hands. "I met someone." His eyes sparkled when he spoke of her. A young executive he'd met at work, intelligent, ambitious, beautiful. "She's amazing, Mom," he continued, words pouring out like a waterfall. "She graduated from Harvard, speaks 3 languages, everyone at the company respects her so much. And somehow she took an interest in me." There was something almost childlike in the way he spoke, a vulnerability that reminded me of the 12-year-old boy showing me a drawing, eager for approval. I confess I was happy to see him so smitten. After so many years dedicated exclusively to work, Michael finally seemed to have found someone special. "How exactly did you meet her?" I asked, pouring more hot chocolate into his mug, the one with the Red Sox logo he loved so much. Michael smiled, leaning back on the couch. "She's on the marketing team working on a presentation for an important client and needed technical help. I stayed late helping her troubleshoot an issue with the interactive graphics. We talked for hours after work was over. It was like time stood still, Mom. I've never felt anything like this before." When she showed me the photo of her on her phone, I noticed she was truly beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed calculated for the cameras. She wore an impeccable business suit, discreet pearls around her neck, and perfect makeup. Something about that smile bothered me, about the eyes that seemed to be assessing the photographer as if they were measuring his worth, but I immediately suppressed the feeling. After all, what mattered was my son's happiness, and he looked radiant. "She's very beautiful," I commented sincerely, handing back the phone. "I hope to meet her soon. She's looking forward to meeting you too." Michael replied, though something in his tone suggested this was more of an assumption than something Ashley had actually expressed. "She comes from a simple family. You know, her parents are from Connecticut, hardworking people. I think you two will get along great." I nodded, trying to ignore the small shadow of doubt that was beginning to form. Something about the way he talked about her sounded like someone trying to convince me or himself. The rest of that Christmas visit was dominated by stories about Ashley. How she'd impressed the CEO during a presentation. How her sense of style was admired by everyone in the company. How she'd recently secured a major contract with a client no one else could land. Michael seemed almost dazzled, as if he couldn't believe his luck at having caught the eye of someone so extraordinary. "She could be with anyone, Mom," he commented repeatedly, an observation that bothered me more with each repetition. My son was smart, kind, successful, and attractive. Why was he putting himself down like this? A few months later, he called to say he'd proposed to Ashley and she'd accepted. It was a Tuesday night. I was watching one of those reality cooking shows that had become my guilty pleasure after. Michael left home when the phone rang. She said yes. His voice was brimming with joy. "I bought the ring weeks ago, waiting for the perfect moment. Last night I took her to dinner at the top of the Prudential Tower, overlooking all of Boston. She was so surprised, Mom, you should have seen her expression." As he described the proposal in meticulous detail, the diamond ring that had surely cost several months of his salary, the expensive champagne, Ashley's emotional reaction, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy for my son's happiness, of course, but also a slight unease that I couldn't quite define. Everything seemed to happen so quickly. They had known each other for less than 6 months. And there was something about the way he described their relationship that felt off-kilter, as if he were constantly trying to prove himself to her. "I'm so happy for you, honey," he said, sincerely, because in the end, that was all that mattered. "When are you planning on getting married?" "Ashley wants a wedding in June of next year," he replied promptly. We've already started looking at venues. She has a very clear vision of how she wants it to be. You should see her notebooks, Mom, full of clippings and ideas. She's so organized again, that tone of almost reverent admiration, as if Ashley were some kind of deity. The wedding was the following June, and he wanted me to be a part of all the preparations. I was touched by the invitation, though a small voice inside me suspected Ashley might not be so enthusiastic about my participation. Still, I tried to push those doubts aside. There was no reason to suspect the worst before I even met her. She wants something elegant, but not overly traditional, Michael explained, clearly echoing Ashley's words. A wedding that reflects who we are as a couple. Modern, sophisticated, but with personal touches. I nodded, even though I was on the phone and he couldn't see me. I wanted to ask if who we are as a couple really included Michael, or if it was just Ashley's vision being presented as consensus. But I bit my tongue. I didn't want to be the meddling mother, the critical mother-in-law before the wedding even happened. When will I meet her? I asked, instead keeping my tone light and enthusiastic. I'm looking forward to welcoming my future daughter-in-law into the family. There was a brief hesitation on the other end of the line. Well, Ashley's super busy with a big project at work right now. Maybe in a few months? She really wants to meet you too, Mom. She talks about it a lot. Something in his tone sounded artificial, rehearsed. She even joked that she's nervous to meet you because she wants to make a good impression. Imagine someone like her worried about the impression she'll make there. It was again that excessive, almost servile admiration. Someone like her, as if Ashley belonged to a higher class of human beings and wasn't just an ordinary woman with qualities and flaws like the rest of us. I swallowed my discomfort and responded enthusiastically. Tell her she doesn't need to worry. I'm sure we'll get along just fine. Over the next few weeks, I tried to learn more about my future daughter-in-law. The information came only from Michael, always in superlative tones. Ashley was the best at everything, the most competent employee, the most dedicated bride, the most elegant woman, the most brilliant mind. I began to wonder if this perfect person really existed or if she was a projection created by my son's blind passion. I tried researching her online but found little beyond a professional LinkedIn profile with limited information and a corporate photo showing her sporting the same calculated smile I'd seen on Michael's phone. I met Ashley in person 3 months after the engagement announcement when they came to spend a weekend with me. Anxiety consumed me in the days leading up to the visit. I cleaned every corner of the house, prepared the guest room with the nicest linens. I had planned meals that would impress, without seeming like I was trying too hard. I wanted everything to be perfect for Ashley to feel welcome, for her to see that while not rich or sophisticated. Like her, I had value as a person, as Michael's mother. They arrived on a Friday afternoon. I watched through the window as they parked in front of the house. Michael got out first, walking around to open the door for Ashley. Even from a distance, I noticed how his body language changed in her presence, slightly hunched shoulders, more restrained gestures, as if he were constantly measuring his actions. Ashley emerged from the car like a celebrity stepping out of a limousine, looking around with an expression that mixed curiosity and something that seemed displeased. She adjusted her expensive sunglasses, grabbed her designer bag, and allowed Michael to carry all her bags. She arrived wearing designer clothes and jewelry that looked like they cost more than my entire house. A seemingly simple summer dress that even my untrained fashion I could tell was from some exclusive brand. Shoes that gleamed like new, but of a style that suggested they weren't her first choice, perhaps, selected specifically for a visit to a Nashville suburb. Her demeanor was polished and polite, but there was something rehearsed in her words, as if she were playing a role in a boring play she'd performed many times before. What a charming house, she commented as she entered, looking around with that same calculated smile from the photos. So, welcoming. The small pause before welcoming spoke volumes. It was the kind of compliment that hid a criticism the house was too small, too simple, too ordinary for her standards. Thank you, I replied, trying to ignore the subtext. It may not be big, but it's full of love and memories. Michael grew up here. Oh yes, Michael told me so much about this place. She continued to smile as she ran a finger over a shelf as if checking for dust. It's exactly as he described. Again, words that seemed kind on the surface but carried a condescending tone beneath. Michael, oblivious to the subtle tension already building, smiled broadly, clearly eager for the two of us to get along. "Isn't it amazing, Mom? Ashley's finally here in our house." He seemed almost childlike in his enthusiasm, looking from one to the other as if expecting us to become instant best friends. Over the course of that weekend, I noticed how she subtly guided Michael's every decision, from what he ate to how he spent his money. We were sitting at the dinner table that first night enjoying the roast I'd so carefully prepared when I first saw the dynamic in action. Michael helped himself to a second helping of mashed potatoes, and Ashley immediately placed her hand over his. "Honey, do you really need another helping? Remember what your personal trainer said about carbs at night." Michael, who had never mentioned a personal trainer in our conversations, immediately put down his spoon. "You're right, love. I need to pay more attention to what I eat." He looked at me with an embarrassed smile. "Ashley is helping me get in shape. I was neglecting my health." Later that evening, as we chatted in the living room, Michael mentioned a trip he planned to visit me for my birthday 2 months later. "I'm thinking of staying for a whole week. Mom, we can take that trip to the National Park we've always wanted to do." Ashley, who had been flipping through a home decor magazine without showing much interest in our conversations, suddenly looked up. "Don't you think you should save for that apartment we saw instead of spending it on this trip? Your birthday is every year, but that real estate opportunity is unique." Her tone was soft, almost sweet, but there was an underlying firmness that brooked no argument. "What apartment?" I asked curiously. Michael hadn't mentioned any plans to move. "Oh, it's a wonderful condo in Beacon Hill," Ashley replied before Michael could open his mouth. "An exclusive location, perfect for us after the wedding. Prices are only going up in that area, so it would be a wise investment." She looked at Michael with an expression that mixed affection and something that seemed challenging. "Isn't that right, dear?" Michael nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. Ashley's right, as always." He turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We can celebrate your birthday on a weekend, Mom. It'll be just as special." She spoke so softly, with such a sweet smile, that it seemed impossible to question her intentions. And Michael, completely smitten, simply nodded, as if her every word were a divine revelation. I watched this dynamic repeat itself dozens of times throughout that weekend. Ashley never raised her voice, never showed open irritation. It was all done with smiles, gentle touches on the arm, seemingly affectionate words that nevertheless always managed to redirect Michael toward her preferences. On Sunday morning, while Ashley was still asleep, I found Michael in the kitchen making coffee. It was a rare moment alone with my son, and I decided to seize the opportunity. "So this apartment in Beacon Hill," I began, casually, carefully measuring my words. "It seems quite expensive for a young couple starting out." Michael stirred his coffee more vigorously than necessary. "It's an investment in our future, Mom. Ashley knows a lot about real estate." "I see," I replied softly. "And have you two discussed how you're going to finance this? Because Beacon Hill is one of the most expensive areas in Boston." "We're working on it," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "I have some savings. I'm working on a side project that will bring in some extra income. And Ashley recently got a promotion. I wanted to ask more to express my concern about the financial stress such a large investment could cause so early in the marriage." But before I could elaborate, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Ashley entered the kitchen, impeccably dressed and made up, with no trace of the sleep-smeared face most people have upon waking. "Good morning," she sang, going straight to Michael and giving him a kiss on the cheek. "What are you two talking about so early? Nothing important." Michael replied quickly, giving me a look that demanded silence. "Just catching up. During the months leading up to the wedding, I tried to connect with Ashley, inviting her to lunches, offering to help with the preparations and sharing stories about Michael's childhood. I wanted to build a genuine relationship with the woman my son had chosen, to create a bond that would allow us to truly be a family. I sent warm emails, made phone calls, and even created a digital album with photos from Michael's childhood that I thought she would cherish. but she always maintained a polite distance, declining my invitations with elaborate excuses, insisting she already had everything under control. "It's very kind of you to offer to help with the flowers, Mary," she replied to one of my emails. "But we've already hired a renowned floral designer who is creating custom arrangements based on our specific color palette. It's a very personal concept we developed together." The message was clear. My input was neither necessary nor desired. Even so, I remained positive and upbeat throughout our interactions. When she finally accepted one of my lunch invitations during a visit to Nashville to meet with a wedding vendor, I went above and beyond to create a pleasant experience. I reserved a table at one of the city's most elegant restaurants, dressed in my best outfit, and arrived 15 minutes early to ensure everything was perfect. Ashley arrived 20 minutes late, offering no apology, immediately checking her phone as she sat down. "I hope you don't mind, I'm waiting for some important emails," she commented, not really expecting a response. Throughout lunch, she barely looked up from her phone, responding to my questions with monosyllables or short sentences that didn't invite further conversation. When I tried to share some stories about Michael as a child, the kind of thing I imagined a bridetobe would want to hear, about her future husband, she finally put the phone away and looked at me with an expression that mixed boredom and barely concealed irritation. "Mary," she said, her tone artificially sweet, "I appreciate those stories, I really do. But Michael and I are focused on the future, not the past. We're building something new together. I'm sure you understand, right?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, smiling through the pain. The message couldn't have been clearer. I belonged to Michael's past, not the future they were creating. The wedding was held at a luxurious Boston hotel, an extravagant celebration that I knew was far beyond Michael's financial means. The ballroom looked like something out of a fairy tale, with elaborate floral arrangements, custom lighting, a live band, and details that screamed no budget limits. When I discreetly inquired about the costs, my son mentioned that Ashley's parents had contributed significantly. They wanted to give this gift to their only daughter. He explained, though something in his eyes suggested discomfort with the subject. Ashley's parents, whom I met only at the wedding rehearsal, didn't seem like the kind of people with the resources to fund such an opulent celebration. Her father, a tired-looking man with calloused hands that spoke of years of manual labor, looked out of place in his rented suit. Her mother, a quiet, nervous woman who rarely spoke without first looking to her daughter for approval, wore a dress that, while elegant, clearly didn't belong in the same category as the designer clothes Ashley sported. I later discovered this was a lie. In fact, Michael had taken out a substantial loan to satisfy his fiancée's wishes, something I only discovered much later. The truth came out by chance when a slightly inebriated coworker of Michael's at the reception commented to me how amazing it was that your son got that huge loan without solid collateral. When he saw the confusion on my face, he quickly changed the subject, realizing he had said too much. But the seed of doubt had been planted. During the ceremony, I was surprised to see how few of Ashley's friends and family were present. There were her parents, of course, a middle-aged couple who seemed uncomfortable with all the luxury, and a sister who barely exchanged a word with me. The bride section was filled mostly with coworkers, most of whom seemed more interested in networking than celebrating the couple's love. When I mentioned it to Michael, he explained that Ashley had lost touch with many people due to her intense dedication to her career. "She's always been very focused, Mom. It's one of the qualities I admire most about her." At the reception, I was seated at a distant table with guests who barely knew the couple. The groom's mother was relegated to a corner while Ashley shone in the spotlight. I tried not to care, telling myself it wasn't about me, it was their day. But the pain was there, sharp and undeniable. Michael, always so attentive, barely had time to talk to me throughout the reception. When he finally managed to approach, he seemed tense, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being caught doing something wrong. "Is everything okay, Mom? Are you having fun?" "Of course, honey," I lied, not wanting to add to what should have been the happiest day of his life. "Everything is beautiful. You look so happy." A quick smile, a hurried hug, and he was called back to Ashley's side, who waved at me with that same calculated smile as always. I swallowed my disappointment and smiled, telling myself it wasn't about me, it was their day. The first few months after their wedding were uneventful. Michael and Ashley moved into a luxurious apartment in an exclusive area of Boston. It wasn't the Beacon Hill condo they'd mentioned, but it was still in an upscale neighborhood with amenities I knew were beyond what a young couple could normally afford. The photos my son sent me showed elegantly decorated rooms with furniture I knew was too expensive for his salary. In one of these images, I noticed a small but obviously valuable sculpture on a side table. "It's an original piece," Michael explained when I asked. "Ashley has an incredible eye for art. On the rare video calls, Ashley would always appear briefly, offer a polite smile, and quickly find an excuse to leave the conversation. I have an important call with a client, or I need to finish preparing for a presentation tomorrow." Michael always nodded understandingly, as if these interruptions were completely normal and expected. The conversations became more relaxed and genuine once she left, though I could tell Michael still maintained a certain wariness, as if he feared being overheard. When I suggested visiting them, there was always some obstacle. The apartment was under construction. They'd be traveling. Ashley would be too busy with work projects. "Maybe next month," Mom Michael would say repeatedly, though next month never seemed to arrive. "Ashley's under a lot of pressure at work right now. It's not a good time." You understand, right? And I understood, or at least pretended to. I accepted the apology without question, not wanting to create tension. After all, they were newlyweds and needed space. It was natural for them to be developing their own routines, their own traditions. I tried to suppress the growing feeling that it wasn't just space Ashley wanted, but a complete exclusion of me from their lives. During this time, I noticed subtle changes in Michael's behavior. Our conversations, once long and fluid, became shorter and more superficial. He rarely talked about anything meaningful, preferring to stick to banalities about the weather or sports. When I asked about his work, a topic that had previously excited him so much, he responded with vague generalities. "It's fine, the same projects as always." When I asked how he and Ashley were adjusting to married life, his answers were equally generic. "We're adjusting, it's a transition for both of us." There was a particularly revealing incident about 6 months after the wedding. I called Michael on a Sunday afternoon, our traditional time to talk. Ashley answered something that rarely happened. "Oh, Mary," she said, her voice exuding false sweetness. "Michael is busy right now. We're having some important friends over for dinner. Can I have him call you back tomorrow?" I readily agreed, not wanting to cause any inconvenience. 2 hours later, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was Ben, Michael's best friend since college, someone I'd gotten to know well during my son's student years. "Mrs. Thompson, I hope you're okay. I just wanted to check in with Michael. I haven't seen him in months. He's canceled our plans several times, and when I try to call, it always goes to voicemail. I'm worried." The message concluded with a request that I not mention his contact information to Michael or Ashley, as I didn't want to cause any trouble. That message set off alarm bells in my mind. Ben wasn't just a casual friend, he was practically a brother to Michael. They'd been college roommates, each other's godparents and confidants for years. The fact that Michael was distancing himself even from Ben suggested a deeper and more troubling isolation than I'd initially imagined. I responded to Ben, expressing my own concerns and promising to stay alert. I tried calling Michael the next day, supposedly returning Sunday's call, but he didn't answer. When we finally spoke 3 days later, his voice sounded tense and controlled. When I casually mentioned Ben asking if they'd seen each other recently, Michael changed the subject so abruptly that the evasion was painfully obvious. "How's your garden, Mom? Did the roses bloom this year?" The big change came when, a little over a year after the wedding, Michael called me with the news that I was going to be a grandmother. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was watering the plants in the garden, enjoying the mild spring sunshine, when my cell phone rang. Seeing Michael's name on the screen was always a source of joy, though. Lately, our conversations had been so superficial and brief that they left more longing than comfort. Mom, his voice rang through the phone, a mixture of excitement and something that almost sounded apprehensive. I have some important news to share. My heart immediately raced. From the intonation, I knew it was something significant. What's wrong, honey? Is everything okay? Yeah, everything's great. It's just, well, Ashley's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. The happiness I felt was indescribable. A grandchild, a new life, an extension of my family, a part of me that would continue in this world. The emotion was so intense that I had to sit down on the small garden bench, my legs suddenly weak. Oh, Michael, this is wonderful. I'm so happy for you both. Tears streamed freely down my face as I imagined a small being with Michael's kind eyes, perhaps with the dimples he had as a child. Ashley is 3 months along, he continued, and I could hear the pride in his voice. We waited until the first trimester was over to share the news. The doctor says everything is perfect. When can I see you? I asked immediately, already mentally calculating when I could. Okay. Take time off from work at the craft store where I now worked part-time. I want to hug you both in person, celebrate this wonderful news. I immediately begin making plans. I offered to go to Boston to help prepare for the baby's arrival, to be present during the final months of the pregnancy, to support them in the first weeks after birth. I talked about the traditions we could create. Together, how I looked forward to being a present and loving grandmother, how I wanted to pass on to my grandson or granddaughter our family stories, the recipes I had taught Michael, the lullabies I had sung to him as a baby. It would be so special to be with you during this time, I continued enthusiastically. I can help set up the nursery, sew some special pieces, and prepare meals while Ashley rests. I remember how exhausting the last few months of pregnancy can be. To my surprise, Michael sounded hesitant. There was an awkward pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice had that cautious tone I was learning to associate with topics related to Ashley. It's very kind of you to offer, Mom, but Ashley prefers to handle everything herself. She has a very specific vision for the nursery and has already hired an interior designer who specializes in children's spaces. Another pause. As for visitors, it might be best to wait until after the baby is born. Ashley gets very tired now, and the doctor recommended she avoid unnecessary stress. I see, I replied, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. And after the birth, I imagine you'll need help for the first few days. Oh, about that? Michael replied quickly, Ashley's mother will come to help after the birth. They've already arranged everything. Each refusal was like a tiny needle in my heart. But again, I swallowed the disappointment. Of course it makes sense for her mother to be present. But whenever it's convenient for you, I'd love to meet my grandson or granddaughter. I tried to keep my tone light and positive, not wanting Michael to feel guilty or pressured. Definitely, he replied, though something in his voice suggested that such a convenient moment might not arrive for a while. I'll keep you posted on everything. Over the next few months, I received sparse updates about the pregnancy. A few occasional ultrasound photos, short messages, letting me know everything was going well, and a brief phone call or two, during which Michael seemed rushed, checking his watch as if he had limited time to talk. I tried to stay present and positive, sending small gifts for the baby, a handmade crocheted blanket, a teddy bear that had been Michael's a storybook we'd read together when he was little. I received polite but brief thank yous via text message, never a phone call or a handwritten note. Ethan was born on a spring morning, a healthy, beautiful boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. I received the news via text message, not a phone call. Ethan James Wilson was born today at 6:32 a.m. No photo accompanied the message. No invitation to visit. Just that basic information, as if it were statistics about a distant event, not the birth of my first and only grandchild. I waited a whole day, featuring Michael would be busy with the first moments of fatherhood. When I didn't hear anything, I called. The call went straight to voicemail. I texted them asking when I could visit, expressing my joy, my love, and my willingness to help in any way needed. The reply came hours later, short and to the point. We're adjusting. Better wait a few days. I'll call you when the time is right. Those few days turned into a week, then 2. Finally, unable to stand the wait and the lack of information any longer, I bought a plane ticket to Boston. I didn't announce my arrival in advance, fearing they'd find some excuse to postpone it again. Instead, I called from the airport already in the city. Michael, I'm in Boston. I need to meet my grandson. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. When he finally spoke, his voice was a mixture of surprise and something that sounded dangerously close to panic. Mom, you should have told me. Ashley. Well, never mind. We're at the hospital now. Ethan's having a routine checkup. Can I meet you in the lobby of our building at 4 o'clock? It wasn't what I expected to be welcomed in the lobby, not into their home. It's as if I were just another visitor and not the child's grandmother. But I accepted, determined to at least see my grandson, hold this new life in my arms, establish some kind of connection. I arrived promptly at 4, laden with gifts I'd brought from Nashville. Michael was already in the lobby without Ashley, without Ethan. His face was tense, and he hugged me quickly, looking around as if afraid of being observed. Mom, we have a problem. Ashley didn't know you were coming, and she. He paused, searching for the right words. She's having a hard time adjusting to motherhood. She's very sensitive. The doctor mentioned something about postpartum depression. She's not comfortable with visitors right now. I see, I replied slowly, though I didn't really understand. But can you bring Ethan to meet me just for a few minutes, Michael? Looked genuinely distressed, torn between loyalty to his wife and affection for his mother. I'll see what I can do. Why don't you go to your hotel and get some rest? I'll talk to Ashley, try to convince her. 3 hours later, I received a call. Michael had managed to negotiate a brief visit. I could come up to the apartment, but only for 30 minutes. And I would have to follow certain rules set. By Ashley, I couldn't hold Ethan. Unsupervised, I couldn't take photos, I couldn't be alone with the baby at any time. I accepted all the conditions, desperate to at least see my grandson. At the apartment, Ashley seemed strangely territorial, limiting the time I could hold the baby, insisting he needed rest whenever I started humming to him. Michael, torn between loyalty to his wife and affection for his mother, awkwardly tried to mediate. Ethan was perfect, tiny, with rosy cheeks and a curious expression when he opened his blue eyes. I held him briefly, marveling at his soft weight in my arms. His sweet baby smelled the feeling of being connected to something bigger than myself, the continuation of our lineage, a promise of the future. But every moment with him was watched over by Ashley, who stood just a few feet away, her eyes never leaving my face, her hands always ready to welcome the baby back. He's hungry, she announced abruptly after only 10 minutes, though Ethan seemed perfectly content in my arms. I need to nurse him now. She held out her arms imperiously, and I reluctantly handed my grandson back, feeling as if a part of my heart was being ripped out along with him. I stayed at a hotel, as Ashley had made it clear she preferred not to have extended visits to their home. During that week, I saw my grandson for only a few hours a day, always under Ashley's watchful eye. When I suggested being alone with the baby while they went out to dinner, just the two of them, for a romantic moment, Ashley reacted as if I'd suggested something absurd. He's still too little to be without me, she declared in a tone that broached no argument. Michael simply nodded, avoiding my gaze. That night, lying in the hotel bed, I cried silently, feeling like I was losing not only my grandson, but also my son. I returned to Nashville feeling a mixture of joy at Ethan's birth and a deep sadness at the distance that was already looming. In airports and on planes, I watched other grandmothers with their phones full of photos of their grandchildren, proudly sharing stories about their first smile, their first word, their first time holding their head. I had none of that. Just a fleeting memory of Ethan's weight in my arms, his sweet smell, the deep blue of his curious eyes. Not even a photo to look at in moments of longing. Over the next few months, I began 4 photos and videos of my grandson. Michael would occasionally send a few, but always claiming to be too busy to call or video chat. The photos were always carefully selected, showing always then alone or with Michael. Never in my arms during that visit, never in spontaneous situations. Images that seemed to have passed through Ashley's scrutiny before being shared. I tried to stay in touch in other ways, sending Ethan small gifts, books, clothes, educational toys. Most didn't even receive a thank you. When I asked Michael if Ethan liked this or that gift, he would reply vaguely, "Oh, yes, I think he did." Or sometimes more revealing, "Ashley didn't think it was age appropriate yet." When Ethan turned 6 months old, I insisted on visiting them again. It was a difficult negotiation with Michael offering a series of excuses and objections. Finally, after weeks of gentle prodding, he relented, albeit on the condition that I stay in a hotel again and limit my visits to specific times established by Ashley. Arriving in Boston, I was shocked by the changes in my son's behavior. Michael, always so confident and determined, seemed constantly anxious, checking his watch during our conversations, wondering when Ashley would be back from the mall or yoga class. There was a constant tension in his shoulders, a worry crease between his brows that hadn't been there before, an almost furtive way of speaking, as if he always feared being overheard. The immaculate house bore no trace of a baby's presence outside his room. No toys strewn about, no blankets thrown on the couch, no hint of a small child living there. Everything was perfectly ordered, every object in its designated place, as if the apartment were a magazine photo and not a real home where real people lived their messy, imperfect lives. Even more disturbing was the fact that no photos of me or Michael's family adorned the walls, only portraits of Ashley at various social occasions. One particularly large photograph dominated the living room, Ashley in a formal gown alone at some charity event. There were a few photos of Ethan, always in carefully arranged poses, and one or two of Michael with his son. But nothing that acknowledged the existence of a family beyond those three: no grandparents, uncles or aunts visible anywhere in the apartment. During that visit, I witnessed how Ashley meticulously controlled the contact I could have with Ethan. It was fascinating in a painful way to observe her methods. She was never overtly rude or aggressive. Everything was done with polite smiles, seemingly reasonable explanations, and a tone of voice that suggested she was only doing what was best for the baby. She always found reasons to interrupt our time together. It was bottle time he needed to sleep. She had a specific calming technique that couldn't be changed. Ethan is very sensitive to changes in routine, she would explain sweetly. The pediatrician emphasized the importance of consistency. Or when I tried to pick him up, he's at a stage where he only feels safe with mommy. And Daddy, it's perfectly normal. The child development book I'm following explains it. I watched with growing concern how Michael behaved in these situations. He seemed torn, uncomfortable, but he never contradicted Ashley. Occasionally, I'd catch an apologetic glance in my direction, but it was fleeting, soon replaced by a carefully neutral expression. When Ashley wasn't around, he transformed. He became more relaxed, more like the Michael I knew. He played with Ethan spontaneously, laughed openly, let the baby explore and make messes. But the mere sound of a key in the door would immediately adjust his behavior quickly, cleaning up any mess, returning to a state of constant vigilance. When I suggested being alone with the baby while they went out to dinner, just the two of them, for some romantic time, Ashley reacted as if I'd suggested something absurd. We were in the kitchen preparing dinner, or rather, I was preparing it while Ashley supervised, occasionally pointing out that I was cutting the vegetables incorrectly or using too much salt. Michael was in the living room with Ethan, a rare moment. When Ashley allowed the baby to be in his father's sole care, "You two haven't had much alone time since Ethan was born," I commented casually, trying to sound nonchalant. "Why don't you take advantage of me being here and go out to dinner tomorrow? I'll take care of the little one. It would be a great opportunity for you, too, to reconnect as a couple." Ashley, who was checking the temperature of the sauce with almost scientific precision, froze for a moment. When she turned to me, her smile was firmly in place, but her eyes had hardened. "That's very kind of you, Mary, but Ethan is still too young to be without me. He has a very specific bedtime routine that only I can implement correctly. I'm sure you could teach me," I insisted softly. "I raised a child on my own, you know. I have some experience with babies." Ashley's smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes grew even colder. "How long ago was that? 30 years? Childcare techniques have evolved a lot since then, Mary. Besides, Ethan has a strong attachment to me. Separation at this stage could be traumatic for him." The conversation was interrupted when Michael walked into the kitchen with Ethan in his arms. "Someone's hungry," he announced, trying to sound cheerful though. His eyes darted between Ashley and me, detecting the underlying tension. Ashley immediately held out her arms to the baby, taking complete control of the situation, effectively ending any further discussion on the subject. That night, lying in my hotel bed, I wept silently, feeling that I was losing not only my grandson, but also my son. There was something deeply wrong with this family dynamic. Something beyond the normal jealousy of a daughter-in-law toward her mother-in-law. Ashley wasn't just keeping me at a distance, she was systematically isolating Michael and Ethan from any outside influence, creating a small controlled world where only her will mattered. And most disturbing was seeing how my son, once so strong and independent, seemed to be gradually disappearing within that system. Things got worse one morning when I found Michael alone in the kitchen. Ashley had left for a yoga class with Ethan. Apparently, there was a new yoga style for mothers and babies she was eager to try. It was a rare opportunity for an honest conversation with my son without Ashley's constant supervision. I sat at the kitchen table with him, observing how tired he looked with deep circles under his eyes and a persistent tension in his shoulders. "Michael," I began, gently covering his hand with mine. "Are you okay? You look exhausted." "I'm fine," he replied automatically, though his eyes avoided mine. "Just sleepless nights, you know how it is with babies." "Yeah, I know," I agreed. "It was hard when you were little too." I had a feeling Ethan was already sleeping through the night. "At least that's what you mentioned the last time we talked." Michael shifted his coffee cup, clearly uncomfortable. "Yeah, he sleeps well. It's just there's a lot going on at work, too." I decided to get straight to the point, feeling like I might not get another opportunity like this anytime soon. "Michael, I'm worried. Not just about Ethan and the fact that I'm barely allowed to get to know him, but about you too. You seem different, tense, anxious. And I can't help but notice how Ashley—" I hesitated, searching for the right words, not wanting to alienate my son. "How Ashley seems to control so many aspects of your family life." His face hardened, and for the first time in his life, he raised his voice to me. "You don't understand how hard this is for her mom. Ashley has high standards. She only wants the best for our son. You're being unfair and invasive." The sudden outburst seemed rehearsed, as if he'd repeated these words over and over in his mind, or perhaps he'd heard them from Ashley so many times that he was now repeating them automatically. "Michael, I'm just worried about you. I want to be a part of my grandson's life. I want you to be happy." That's what mothers do. They worry, they care, they try to help. "Well, no one asked for your help," he replied, though his voice had lost some of its initial harshness. "Ashley and I have everything under control. If we wanted your involvement, we would have asked." His words hit me like a slap. Never in all my years raising him alone had he spoken to me like that. The pain must have been evident on my face because I immediately saw regret in his eyes. "Mom, He trailed off, running a hand over his face in frustration. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. It's just things are complicated right now." "What kind of complications, son?" I asked softly. "Maybe I can help." He glanced at his watch nervously. "Ashley will be back soon. We'd better not be having this kind of conversation when she gets here." And with that, he stood up abruptly, ending the discussion. I realized in that moment that Ashley wasn't just distancing me from my grandson, but it also created a chasm between me and my son. A chasm filled with fear, manipulation, and control. I returned home earlier than planned, my heart heavy and my eyes swollen from crying. For the next 2 years, my relationship with Ethan and Michael was sustained through scraps of attention. Short phone calls on specific dates, a few half-hearted photos sent, quick controlled visits when they came to Nashville, always staying in hotels, never at my house. With each interaction, I noticed how uncomfortable Ethan, a handsome, smart boy who was growing up quickly, seemed to be with me. How could it be otherwise to him? I was practically a stranger, someone who showed up occasionally with gifts and an eager smile, a lady his mother clearly didn't approve of. Ashley had established an elaborate system of unspoken rules that determined when and how I could interact with my family. I tried to adapt to follow her unspoken rules to do everything I could to avoid displeasing them. When I sent gifts to Ethan, I always checked with Ashley first to ensure they were appropriate, which usually meant that most of my ideas were rejected as too stimulating, not educational enough, or not aligned with our developmental philosophy. In a desperate effort to maintain some kind of connection, I began spending considerable sums on expensive gifts I knew Ashley would approve. A set of wooden blocks imported from Sweden. Children's books in English and Mandarin, apparently. Ashley was determined that Ethan would be bilingual from an early age. Clothing from specific brands she deemed appropriate. Each gift was an attempt to buy a place, however small, in my grandson's life. I also offered financial help when Michael mentioned they were considering an expensive private school for when Ethan was old enough. It was an exclusive Montessori school with a 2-year waiting list and tuition that cost more than many colleges. It would be an investment in his future. Michael explained, though his eyes avoided mine, as they always did when the subject was money. Ashley did a lot of research. It really is the best place for kids with Ethan's cognitive profile. What exactly is the cognitive profile of a 2-year-old? I wanted to ask, but bit my tongue. Instead, I offered to pay part of the tuition, a significant sum that represented months of careful saving. Michael accepted with almost exaggerated gratitude, as if I were doing him an extraordinary favor rather than simply acting like any grandmother would. My every gesture was a desperate attempt to maintain some kind of connection, however tenuous. When Ethan turned 3, Ashley began using a different tactic. Whenever I called or texted asking about my grandson, she would reply that he was busy with enrichment activities. At 3, Ethan apparently had a schedule busier than a business. Executives music lessons, baby swimming lessons, an introduction to Mandarin. Socializing with other Boston High Society kids. The underlying message was clear. The life they were building for my grandson was too sophisticated to include a simple Nashville grandmother. Ethan's having his violin lesson right now, Mary. Maybe we can schedule a video call for next week. Or we're in swimming class, then we have sensory therapy, then Mandarin playgroup. Today really isn't a good day. There was always an excuse, always. Something more important, more valuable, more enriching than a few minutes of conversation with Grandma. Michael, increasingly absent from our communications, seemed to have delegated all management of family affairs to Ashley, including his mother's involvement. When he did manage to speak directly to him, they were brief and superficial conversations, always with Ashley in the background asking who he was talking to or reminding him of some impending commitment that required him to hang up. It was around this time that I received an unexpected call from Michael one Sunday night. I was watching an old movie on television wrapped in a handmade blanket when the phone rang. Seeing his name on the caller ID, especially at such an unusual hour, filled me with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "Michael, is everything okay?" His voice sounded strained as he explained that they were facing some temporary financial difficulties. The luxurious apartment, the fancy cars, the expensive schools, the extravagant vacations, and the lifestyle Ashley considered barely acceptable had finally taken their toll. He asked me awkwardly if I could lend. We both knew he had no intention of returning. Taylor Threethirst to help them get through this rough patch. "It's just a cash flow issue, Mom." He explained, his voice low, as if he feared being overheard. "I have some bonuses coming up in the next few months, and Ashley is about to land a big contract at work. We just need a little help getting through this." I felt a knot in my stomach. $30,000 was no small sum for me. It represented a significant portion of my retirement savings money. I had carefully saved over the years, skimping on small luxuries, working overtime when possible, managing every penny carefully. But what is money compared to the chance to regain a place in my son's and grandson's lives? "Sure, son," replied without hesitation. "I'll transfer tomorrow." Without hesitation, I transferred the money the next day. It was a significant portion of my retirement savings. But what is money compared to the chance to regain a place in my son and grandson's lives? The transfer was accompanied by a loving message expressing My love and support emphasizing that family always comes first, that I would always be there for them in times of need. To my disappointment, the loan didn't bring our relationship closer as I'd naively hoped. After a brief thank you message from Michael, weeks of silence followed. When I finally reached him almost a month later, I casually asked if I could visit soon, perhaps for Ethan's upcoming birthday. My grandson would be turning for a significant milestone. I was eager to celebrate with him. There was a long pause before he replied that it wouldn't be a good time. The hesitation, the discomfort in his voice was palpable even over the phone. When I gently pressed, he finally admitted the truth. Ashley thinks you're putting stress on the family environment and that it would be better if I weren't at the party. Does it stress the family environment? I repeated, unable to hide the hurt in my voice. Michael, I barely see you. How can I stress something I barely participate in? It's complicated, Mom, he replied evasively. Ashley is very sensitive to certain energies, and Ethan absorbs that sensitivity. The child therapist we're seeing emphasizes the importance of maintaining emotionally stable environments during celebrations. Child therapist, what would be the need for a therapist for a seemingly healthy and well-cared for 4-year-old? I wanted to ask, but again I swallowed my doubts, fearful of further alienating my son. I understand, I replied, though I clearly didn't. Perhaps we can celebrate another time then. Maybe he agreed, vaguely not committing to anything specific. We'll see how things go down the road. I swallowed the lump that formed in my throat, and in the calmest voice I could manage, asked if I could at least send a gift. Sure, Mom, but nothing too big or loud. You know how sensitive Ashley is to certain types of toys. Again, the restrictions. The limitations, the subtle barriers being erected between me and my grandson. Over the next few months, as I tried to process the pain of being explicitly excluded from my grandson's life, I noticed a pattern in Michael's communications. He only contacted me when he needed something, usually money. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger requests. A home renovation. Apparently, Ashley had decided that the kitchen remodeled just 2 years earlier needed a complete overhaul to incorporate the latest European designs. A monthly fee for the country club. Ashley insisted they needed membership for Ethan's social development. An investment in a business owned by a friend of Ashley's that seemed promising, though the details were always vague. With each request I gave in not for the material value, but for the hope that my generosity might eventually open a door to my relationship with my grandson. It was an irrational thought, I knew, but a grandmother's love rarely follows rational paths. I wanted to believe that if I demonstrated enough support, enough generosity, enough unconditional love, eventually the barriers would fall and allow me to truly be a part of their lives. By the time Ethan turned 5, I had already loaned Michael and Ashley over $120,000. Practically my entire life savings and part of the proceeds from the sale of the house where I raised my son, having moved into a smaller apartment. It was a difficult decision to sell that house full of memories, the place where Michael took his first steps, where we celebrated so many birthdays, where we shared so many laughs and tears over the years. But the apartment was more practical for a woman aging alone, and the extra money would be useful for helping my family or so, I told myself. Still, I was allowed to see my grandson only a few hours a year, always under strictly controlled conditions. The few photos I received showed a beautiful boy who barely knew me, who had been taught to call me Miss Mary instead of Grandma, who seemed uncomfortable in my presence because I was essentially a stranger to him. When I did see him in person, our encounters were always supervised, always limited, always with Ashley watching every interaction. Like a hawk, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of genuine connection between us. The situation reached a new level of cruelty when, on a rare visit to Nashville, Michael was in town for a work conference. Ashley suggested that perhaps it would be best if I didn't try to establish to close a relationship with Ethan. We were sitting on the patio of an upscale restaurant, a place Ashley had specifically chosen because it was the only one with acceptable standards in town, in her own words. Ethan was distracted by an iPad headphones, completely isolating him from our conversation. Michael had wandered off to take a work call, leaving me alone with Ashley for the first time in years. "You know how it is, Mary," she said. With that cold smile, I'd learned to fear children get confused easily. So many adults wanting their attention, so many different expectations. My parents already play the role of very present grandparents, and frankly, I think Ethan already has all the family structure he needs. The comment hit me like a punch in the gut. His parents, whom I rarely saw in the photos Michael sent, who, as far as I knew, lived in Connecticut, rather than Boston, were apparently very present grandparents, while I, who had dedicated every free moment to trying to connect with my grandson, who had given every penny I could to support the family, was considered an unnecessary complication, a source of confusion. Ashley, I began trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger and pain boiling inside me. Ethan is my only grandson. Michael is my only son. Family isn't something you choose to have or not have based on convenience or simplicity. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Family is what you make of it, Mary. And Michael and I have decided that what's best for Ethan is a simplified and consistent family structure. Less is more, especially when it comes to formative influences. She paused, taking a sip of her expensive wine before continuing. Besides, with all due respect, you and Michael have, well, different stories. He grew up in circumstances that aren't exactly what we want for Ethan. The implication was clear. Our modest life in Nashville, the years of struggling as a single mother, the sacrifices we'd made together were somehow inferior, undesirable, something to be overcome and forgotten, not celebrated and honored. Michael, sitting beside her, studied his own shoes, intently avoiding my gaze. I didn't respond. What could I say that she was systematically erasing me from my grandson's life? That my own son was enabling this abuse, the words stuck in my throat, along with the tears I refused to shed in front of her. It was after this encounter that I began to notice worrying changes in Michael's behavior. Whenever we spoke without Ashley present, which was extremely rare, he seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone, speaking in a low voice as if afraid of being overheard. His physical appearance had also changed, thinner, with permanent bags under his eyes, a constant tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. The confident, cheerful Michael I had created seemed to be fading, replaced by an anxious, insecure version of himself. In one such conversation, when I asked if he was okay, he gave a bitter laugh and said, "Define okay, Mom." There was so much in those three simple words: exhaustion, resignation, perhaps even a veiled plea for help. Before I could respond, Ashley entered the room, and he immediately changed the subject, returning to the dutiful, content husband she'd expected. These brief glimpses into Michael's true emotional state troubled me deeply. I began to wonder if what I was witnessing went beyond ordinary manipulation and into the realm of emotional abuse. Ashley didn't just control access to Ethan, she seemed to control every aspect of Michael's life as well, isolating him from friends and family, undermining his trust, and making him dependent on her approval for every decision, big and small. About 6 months before Ethan's 6th birthday, I received an unexpected call from a woman named Lisa, who introduced herself as Ashley's former assistant at the company where she worked before marrying Michael. The call came one Sunday afternoon while I was watering the plants in the small garden I'd created on my apartment balcony. The unfamiliar number made me hesitant, but something compelled me to answer. Thompson, the voice on the other end, was young but firm. "My name is Lisa Reynolds. You don't know me, but I worked with Ashley Williams for almost 2 years at Mercer Financial. I hope you don't mind me calling. I found your number through an online search." "I don't mind, but I confess I'm curious," I replied, putting the watering can aside and sitting on the small porch bench. "What can I do for you, Lisa?" There was a brief hesitation before she continued. "Actually, it's more about what I can do for you, or rather for your son and grandson. Look, I have information about Ashley that I think you should know. Information that could be important for their safety." My heart raced. Security, what are you talking about? Lisa explained that she had found my number through an online search and felt she needed to alert me to something important. According to her, Ashley had been fired for fraudulent behavior, having embezzled significant funds from important clients. The company had decided not to file formal charges to avoid negative publicity, but Ashley had left with a tarnished reputation in the industry. It was all hushed up, of course. Lisa continued, her voice now lower, as if she feared being overheard, even over the phone. Large financial firms don't like to admit they've been deceived, especially by someone relatively junior. They preferred to handle the matter internally, allowing her to resign rather than being formally fired in exchange for her silence and the return of some of the funds. Why are you telling me this? Now, I asked, still trying to process what I was hearing. When exactly did this happen? About 7 years ago? Just before I imagined she met her son. Lisa paused. It took me a while to work up the courage. It's not easy to make that kind of connection. But recently, I ran into an old colleague who mentioned seeing Ashley, and I learned she now has a young son. That worried me. She's dangerous, Lisa warned. I've seen how she manipulates people, how she destroys relationships to get what she wants. I'm scared for her son and her grandson. The call ended with Lisa promising to send me some documents she'd saved copies of emails, suspicious transaction logs, meeting notes that hinted at Ashley's fraudulent behavior. I can't promise it will be enough to prove anything legally, she warned. As I said, the company preferred to keep it quiet. But it could be the start of a deeper investigation if you decide to pursue that path. Initially, I resisted believing Lisa's words. Despite all the problems, it was difficult to conceive that the woman my son had chosen to share his life with was capable of something as serious as fraud. Ashley was controlling, manipulative, emotionally abusive. I was already convinced of that. But a fraudster, it seemed like too big a leap, almost as if my dislike for her was leading me to accept implausible accusations. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. The documents Lisa sent me a few days later, while not conclusive in themselves, contained enough disturbing information to warrant further investigation. I began my own discreet investigation. I used some of the little money I had left to hire a private investigator, something I never imagined I would do. I asked him to check Ashley's background, her professional references, anything that could confirm or refute Lisa's allegations. 2 weeks later, the investigator invited me to a meeting at a discreet coffee shop in downtown Nashville. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a permanently skeptical expression. Exactly the kind of person you'd expect in this profession. He placed a thick envelope on the table and looked at me with a seriousness that made my stomach sink. Mrs. Thompson, I found much more than I expected. He began pushing the envelope toward me. I suggest you read this in a private place. It is not pleasant reading. The investigator handed me a report that made my blood run cold. Ashley wasn't just a skilled manipulator, she was a serial fraudster. Before meeting Michael, she had been investigated for suspected financial fraud at 3 different companies. The first time was right after college when she worked at an investment bank in Chicago. The second time was 2 years later at a consulting firm in Seattle. The third, and apparently more serious, was at Mercer Financial in Boston, exactly as Lisa had reported. But the report didn't stop there. There were also records of 2 previous marriages, both 2 men of significant wealth. Both ended abruptly when the money ran out or suspicions began to arise. The first marriage, to a doctor 20 years her senior in Chicago, lasted only 8 months and ended with accusations of theft and unauthorized use of credit cards. The second, to a businessman in Seattle, was slightly longer, almost 2 years, and involved more serious allegations of emotional manipulation and social isolation. In one case, the ex-husband even issued a restraining order alleging threatening behavior after the separation. According to the documents, Ashley had threatened to release compromising information about her ex-husband's business dealings if he didn't agreed to her divorce terms, which included an exorbitant amount of alimony. Even more alarming, the surname she used, Williams, was not her birth name. Ashley had been born Jessica Miller in a small Midwestern town, the daughter of a mechanic and a waitress, not the sophisticated Connecticut parents she had introduced to everyone. The parents I met at the wedding were actually actors for Hira. Particularly disturbing discovery that explained her evident discomfort and lack of any physical resemblance to Ashley. The report included photos that proved everything Ashley Jessica in her previous marriage's court, documents and small local newspaper reports about the fraud allegations. There was even a photo of her with brown hair and a completely different style from a time when she apparently presented herself as Jessica Lawson. During her brief time in Seattle, it was a complete dossier of lies and manipulation, a meticulous documentation of a life built on deception. When I finished reading the report, I looked at the investigator with what I imagine must have been an expression of absolute horror. He maintained that same serious professional look, but there was also something that seemed almost like compassion in his tired eyes. Ms. Thompson, in 15 years on this job, I have rarely seen someone with such a consistent history of exploitation. Your son and grandson are living with a predator. She manipulated everything, I whispered, still trying to process the enormity of what I'd discovered. Her parents, her work history, even her own name. And now she has access to all of your son's finances, I assume, and has isolated him from family and friends. The investigator wasn't really asking, he was confirming. A pattern he had obviously seen before. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, I found my voice. What do I do now? How do I protect my son and grandson? That depends on how willing your child is to listen. The investigator replied calmly. People in this situation, married to manipulators often, resist evidence, especially at first. Social isolation and emotional dependence are powerful tools. But this evidence is solid, Ms. Thompson. If your child is ready to listen, it will be hard to ignore. I spent days pondering what to do with this information. My initial impulse was to call Michael immediately, but I feared he wouldn't believe me that Ashley had already manipulated him to the point where he'd consider any accusation against her an attack motivated by jealousy or resentment. I needed to be careful, strategic. Find the right moment, the right approach, the right words to make him see the truth without him feeling attacked or judged for having been deceived. As I was making a plan, I received a text from Michael, I think weeks. Ethan would be turning 6 next month, and they were throwing a party. To my surprise, I was invited. It was a short message, too formal to come from my son. Dear Mom, we would like to invite you to Ethan's 6th birthday celebration to be held at our home on May 15th at 2:00 p.m. Please RSVP by the 5th. Sincerely, Michael. No, with love, no expression of affection or enthusiasm, nothing to suggest. This was a son inviting his mother to an important family event. The tone of the message seemed strange, too formal to come from my son, and I suspected Ashley had dictated or even written the text. The complete absence of Michael's personality, his normally affectionate way of communicating with me, even in the darkest moments, was a clear sign that these weren't his words. Still, I responded immediately, accepting the invitation, my heart racing at the prospect of seeing my grandson after nearly a year of separation. I accepted the invitation immediately, but decided not to mention my discoveries via text or phone. This was a conversation that needed to happen in person, preferably at a time when I could speak to Michael alone. The birthday party wouldn't be the ideal place for such a dramatic revelation, of course, but perhaps I could find a moment before or after for a private conversation with my son. Or at the very least, observe the family dynamics with fresh eyes, now that I knew what was really going on. In the weeks leading up to the party, I spent considerable time choosing the perfect gift for Ethan. I wanted something meaningful, something that demonstrated my love and my genuine desire for connection, even if circumstances made that connection nearly impossible. From previous conversations, I knew he had developed a passion for dinosaurs and interest. Michael had also had, at the same age, a small genetic connection that thrilled me more than it should have. I searched extensively until I found the perfect gift, a rare plush model of a Parasaurolophus. Michael's favorite dinosaur, made by a company specializing in scientifically accurate replicas for children. It wasn't just a cute toy, it was educational and detailed, with a small booklet explaining the Cretaceous period and the habits of this fascinating herbivorous dinosaur. It was the kind of gift I hoped even the picky Ashley would approve. Of educational enough for her taste, yet still fun and affectionate, something a 6-year-old boy would truly appreciate. I wrapped the gift in colorful paper decorated with tiny dinosaurs, added a handmade card with a drawing of a grandmother and grandson holding hands, and prepared for the trip to Boston with a mixture of hope and apprehension. I didn't know what to expect from the party, whether I would be truly welcomed or merely tolerated. I didn't know if I would have the opportunity to talk to Michael about my discoveries or if Ashley would be constantly present, monitoring every interaction as she always did. I didn't know if Ethan would remember me, if he would be happy to see me, if he would like the gift I had so carefully selected. But I knew I had to go. I had to try. For Michael, for Ethan, for myself. Because despite everything, we were family. And family doesn't give up, even when the path seems impossible. On the day of the party, I flew to Boston with my heart full of hope and my stomach churning with anxiety. I carried with me not only the gift for Ethan, but also the evidence I had collected on Ashley. I hadn't planned to confront her at the party, of course. This day was about Ethan, but I was determined to find a moment to speak to Michael. Privately show him what I had discovered, help him see the truth about the woman he was married to. During the flight, I mentally rehearsed what I would say to him, how I would begin the conversation, how I would present the evidence in a way that wouldn't sound accusatory or judgmental. Michael, I've discovered some information that deeply concerns me, and as your mother, I feel I need to share it with you, ... double quotes, or perhaps son. I know this will be difficult to hear, but please trust me just enough to examine this evidence with an open mind, ... V. Exact words mattered less than the taff. Exact words mattered less than the tone, compassionate, non-confrontational, concerned, non-judgmental, loving, non-accusatory. The airport taxi dropped me off in front of the posh condominium on the outskirts of Boston where Michael, Ashley, and Ethan lived. It was a gated community with stately homes, perfectly manicured lawns, and luxury cars parked in the garages. So different from the simple but welcoming neighborhood where I had raised Michael, with children playing on the sidewalks and neighbors chatting over hedges. Here there was an almost oppressive silence, a carefully cultivated privacy that bordered on isolation. When I arrived at the address, I immediately noticed something strange. There were no cars parked in front of the house, no sign of the children's party that was supposed to be taking place. Normally, a 6th birthday celebration would involve other families, other children, colorful balloons, maybe even an entertainer or clown. But the house seemed strangely quiet, almost deserted. Still, I heard voices and music coming from inside. Confused, I double-checked the invitation on my phone to confirm the date and time. Yes, it was today at 2 p.m., and it was already a few minutes past that time. I rang the doorbell nervously, adjusting the bow on the colorful package I carried. I waited, my heart racing, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. After almost a minute, the door finally opened. Ashley was there, impeccably dressed and made up as always. An expensive pastel dress, understated, but obviously expensive jewelry, hair, and makeup that looked like they'd come from a salon that very morning. "Mary," she said, my name sounding like an accusation on her lips. "What a surprise you came." Confused, I replied, "I got the invitation to Ethan's birthday party." Michael texted me, ... double quotes, a smile that didn't reach her eyes formed on Ashley's face. Oh, that. Actually, there was a change of plans. The party was moved up to yesterday. Ethan was so excited, we decided not to wait. You should have confirmed before coming. The lie was so blatant, so obviously false, that for a moment I was speechless. I could clearly hear the sound of children's music coming from inside the house. Children's voices laughing and shouting, the unmistakable hubbub of a party in full swing. Before I could process the cruelty of that lie, I heard my grandson's voice coming from inside the house. "Mommy, when are we cutting the cake?" And then other children's voices, laughter. The party was happening right now. I had been deliberately deceived, invited to the wrong day, only to be humiliated. "Can I come in?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. "Since I'm here, I'd like to give Ethan my gift." And Ashley interrupted, her icy tone contrasting with her fixed smile. I don't think that's a good idea. Ethan is with his little friends, right? Now, and the presence of a stranger might make him uncomfortable. It was then that Ashley leaned forward slightly and said, "The words that opened this story, you'll never see him again, you'll never see him. Again, understand I'm tired of your pathetic attempts to intrude on our perfect family." Something inside me simply snapped. Years of manipulation and abuse culminated in that moment. "Perfect," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "Let's see how perfect your family will remain when everyone knows who Jessica Miller is." Ashley's face instantly paled at the mention of her real name. I opened my purse and pulled out a folder. "I have documents here about your 2 previous marriages, the financial fraud the fake parents hired. For the wedding, everything." "Michael," I shouted, knowing he must be nearby. "Michael, come see who the woman you married really is." The next moment the door flew open, revealing Michael and several adults staring in shock. The secret was out, and the terror in Ashley's eyes confirmed that my long journey of grief had finally come to an end. 3 months later, with Ashley facing legal action and Michael beginning a painful process of emotional recovery, we sat in my small apartment in Nashville, me, Michael, and my precious Ethan, who now affectionately called me Grandma, Mary, as I watched my son and grandson play. Together, finally free from that emotional prison, I realized that no matter how painful the journey, genuine love always finds a way to prevail. If you've made it this far in my story, you probably recognize that families aren't always what we imagine, right? If this story touched your heart in any way, leave a like so others can find the strength to face their own abusers. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that remind us that even in the darkest moments, there's always a path to light. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever faced a manipulator in your life? How did you find the courage to break free?